Seaman, Chapter 5, pages 44 through 50. "Have a seat, gentlemen," said Lewis in a courteous tone. Then he excused himself and ducked inside the boat's cabin. When he came out, he was carrying a partially filled bottle of whiskey and some glasses. The captains poured each of the chiefs a quarter of a glass of whiskey. The Indians smiled, sniffed the alcohol, and drank with great pleasure. When they finished, they gestured for more, but the bottle was empty. One of them grabbed the empty bottles and sucked out the last few drops. The chiefs scowled and spoke in angry voices. Without a common language, the captains could not smooth the situation. Lewis called for a pirogue to come and take the chiefs to shore. This angered the Indians even more. One of the Teton chiefs jumped to his feet, and Seaman stepped forward, a low growl coming from his throat. The Indian froze, glaring at the dog. "Sit, Seaman," Lewis said firmly, taking a step forward. Lewis exchanged a glance with Clark. Then he gave the Indians a stern look, and the Indians slowly sat down. As soon as the pirogue pulled up next to the keelboat, Clark jumped aboard and gestured for the chiefs to follow. They refused to move. Annoyed, Clark called to 7 of the men. "Push the chiefs aboard this pirogue. We're going to put an end to this nonsense right now." The men rushed to obey Clark's order. As soon as the Indians were aboard the pirogue, the men rowed them towards shore. Lewis stayed aboard the keelboat and positioned himself in front of the swivel gun. Seaman stood at his side. Lewis kept his eyes on the pirogue. When it reached the shores, the chiefs refused to get out. Some of the Teton warriors surrounded the boat and grabbed its bowline and mast. The explorers demanded that the Indians let go, but the Indians glared and spoke in gruff, defiant voices. "Enough!" shouted Clark. He stood up and drew his sword. He tossed his flame-colored hair out of his eyes, and cheeks flushed a deep red. Along the shore, Teton warriors stretched their bows tight and placed arrows across the strings. They edged closer to the pirogue. "Prepare for action," Lewis ordered, in a stern voice that could be heard on shore. Aboard the keelboat, men grabbed their rifles and knelt by the sides of the boat. 2 men loaded the swivel gun, and Lewis got ready to fire. During one strained minute, nobody moved. Then Black Buffalo, one of the Teton chiefs, yanked the pirogue's line out of the hands of the Indian warriors. He ordered his men to let go of the mast. He jumped aboard the pirogue with the other 2 chiefs following him. Aboard the keelboat, Lewis exhaled slowly, but he kept his hands on the swivel gun. "This expedition must and will go on," Clark declared, throwing back his shoulders as he faced the line of Teton braves. "Our men are warriors." The Indians could not understand Clark's words, but his meaning was clear from his tone and posture. Still, the Tetons held their ground. They stood facing the pirogue, loaded bows in hand, while their chiefs huddled together, speaking in low voices. Clark approached the chiefs and offered to shake hands. The chiefs turned their backs on him. Angrily, Clark turned on his heel and jumped into the pirogue. The boat was pulling away from shore when Black Buffalo splashed into the water, calling to Clark. Clark ordered the men to stop rowing, and Black Buffalo pointed toward the keelboat. He seemed to be requesting a ride in the boat. Clark glanced toward Lewis, then he agreed. He allowed Black Buffalo and 2 warriors to get into the pirogue. The men rowed back to the keelboat, and the Indians and Clark climbed aboard. As evening approached, Black Buffalo made signs that he wanted to sleep in the keelboat. Although the captains agreed, they nervously ordered a heavy guard. Lewis slept little that night, and Seaman did not leave his master's side. The next day, Black Buffalo traveled aboard the keelboat until they came to his village. He invited the captains to visit, and they agreed, hoping to end this tense meeting on a pleasant note. Seaman stayed beside Lewis as the explorers walked through the Teton Sioux village of almost 100 white teepees. Hundreds of Indians crowded around to stare at them. When the explorers came to a large teepee in the center of the group, Black Buffalo motioned for them to sit in a circle with some of his braves. The Indians passed around a pipe to smoke. The explorers noticed many female captives in Black Buffalo's village. One of the explorers knew some Indian languages, and he tried speaking to one of the captive women. She said she was from a tribe called Omaha. She explained that there had been a recent battle between the Teton Sioux and the Omahas. In the battle, the Sioux had captured Omaha women and children and had killed and scalped many Omaha braves. That evening, the captains were carried on white buffalo robes back to the central lodge. They watched the Sioux villagers perform a victory dance around the flickering campfire. Some of the Teton men beat sticks on drums made of stretched hides, while their women danced. The dancers wore deer hooves tied to their clothes as rattles. They carried scalps won by their husbands in a recent battle. The women leaped up and down, waving the scalps on the end of the sticks. Some Indian men also entered the circle to join the dance. The explorers threw beads or tobacco to encourage the dancers. Seaman sat stiffly beside Lewis. He smelled the dancers' sweat as well as the rancid odors from the decaying scalps. The hair on the back of Seaman's neck stood up and his leg muscles tensed. A village dog crept up behind Seaman and sniffed his tail. Seaman jerked his head around and snarled. Lewis placed his hand on Seaman's back. Gently he bent down and spoke into Seaman's ear. "Steady, boy. My nerves are tight as bowstrings, too. But we must hold our tempers." Lewis was speaking to calm himself as much as to quiet his dog. Clark whispered to Lewis, "Did President Jefferson give you any instruction for our meeting with the Sioux?" Lewis nodded. "He wanted us to open up a discussion about trade like we did with the other Indians. Jefferson warned me about the Sioux, though. He said they were fierce warriors and feared by white traders as well as other tribes. I remember the words he wrote. 'On that nation we wish most particularly to make a friendly impression because of their immense power.'" Suddenly a young warrior broke out of the dance and gestured angrily at the white men in front of him. The warrior had not received as many gifts as the woman dancing near him. He shouted at the explorers, then grabbed a drum from one of the players and hurled it onto the ground, cracking it. Then as he stalked off, he grabbed 2 other drums and flung them into the fire. After he stomped off, 2 women retrieved the drums and the dance continued. Lewis exchanged an uneasy glance with Clark. He stroked Seaman's back with a stiff, tense hand. That night, Black Buffalo again insisted on sleeping in the keelboat with the captains. Again they agreed, but they placed a heavy guard on duty. The captains muttered under their breath. Were the Tetons planning on to ambush them? Neither the captains nor Seaman got much sleep. Black Buffalo invited the captains to his village again the next day. The Sioux entertained them with another scalp dance at night. But by then the captains were so exhausted they could barely stay awake. All the explorers were eager to finally say their goodbye on their way. The next morning, Black Buffalo met them at the river with some of his warriors. The Indians grabbed the keelboat's bowline and refused to let go. A line of Indian warriors suddenly appeared along the bank of the river. Black Buffalo demanded some tobacco. Clark turned to Lewis and said, "He's testing us, Meriwether. If we give him what he asks, he'll ask for more." Lewis clenched his teeth to prevent angry words from pouring out. Seaman nudged Lewis's hand. Lewis took a deep breath and spoke softly. "We must remember President Jefferson's instructions." Lewis looked at Clark. "The Sioux greatly outnumber us. We must try to hold our tempers, William." Clark frowned. Then he tossed a small plug of tobacco on the bank. He yelled to Black Buffalo, "You have told us you are a great man. Show us your influence by taking the rope from your men without coming to hostilities." Clark turned and walked slowly toward the swivel gun to show he intended to back his words with actions if necessary. Black Buffalo continued to demand tobacco. Lewis's patience had run out. "We do not mean to be trifled with," he shouted. Seaman watched the faces of each speaker. He kept an eye on the movements of the Sioux warriors who were holding the keelboat's line. Although he couldn't understand what the Indians wanted or what the captains were shouting, Seaman sensed the mood of both groups. The captains were frustrated and angry, and the Indians were ready to fight. The fur on Seaman's spine stood up. A low growl came from his throat. Black Buffalo insisted on receiving more tobacco. Lewis threw a plug of tobacco at the warriors who held the boat's line. To everyone's relief, the Indians let go. The captains ordered the men to row upstream, and the men quickly grabbed their paddles. As the boats passed a young Indian on the shore, Clark managed to get the last word. "If you are determined to stop us, we are ready to defend ourselves," he shouted. Clark knew the brave could not understand his words, but he was so frustrated he needed to shout at someone. Both of the captains were tired and irritated. That night they ordered the men to pull up at a sandbar. Sandbars were the safest spots to camp for night camp, since enemies would have to swim or paddle a boat to reach the soldiers, and the splashing would alert the guard. The explorers ate their evening meal in silence, each man reflecting on the events of the last few days. As soon as the meal was finished, the captains posted guards and went to bed. Seaman settled down between the captain's bedrolls. As he climbed into his bedroll, Lewis broke the silence. "I don't think we've seen the last of the Sioux, William. We have to pass through these waters on our return trip." Clark frowned. "In my opinion, the Sioux are nothing but pirates, the pirates of the Missouri River. It won't be easy to establish trade between our country and the Indians if the Sioux control this stretch of waterway." Lewis nodded thoughtfully. "We need to create a strong bond with the natives upriver. We'll have to urge the other tribes to ignore the Sioux. That's the only way our country will be able to trade with the Indians of the plains." The captains didn't speak for a few minutes. Seaman gave a great noisy sigh and laid his big head on his front paws. "At least there was no bloodshed," Lewis said at last. "We didn't establish friendly relations, so we can't count our meeting with the Teton Sioux as a success, but at least we avoided a fight."